Thursday is A-level results day, meaning university will be on the minds of hundreds of thousands of young people across the country as they find out how they've done. But unless you're resident in Scotland and planning to go to a Scottish university, lucky you, the cost of your education will likely be weighing pretty heavily too. And that's with good reason. Analysis for think tank the Intergenerational Foundation has suggested students face a ticking time bomb of debt and higher taxes, with successive governments increasing the share of the cost of education that young people are expected to shoulder. All that's happening through student loans, of course. There are two different post-2012 student loan plans in England, with important differences between them. So if you started your degree between 2012 and 2023, you're on Plan 2. Students starting degrees after 2023 are on what's called Plan 5. I think 3 and 4 were variants on Plan 2 that you paid at the same time, but if you sort of had different characteristics. Both plans take 9% of your earnings, so after a certain amount. But if you're on Plan 5, you start paying it off when you're earning £25,000 a year. Those who took out Plan 2 loans in 2022 only started paying their loans off when they were earning a little over £27,000 a year. So the threshold has gone down. The interest on Plan 5 is lower, so that's where Plan 5 is a little bit better. It's pegged to the retail price index, and that's a measure of inflation, currently at 3%, so it's the higher measure of inflation, which is always very frustrating for students. For Plan 2, that's the interest rate if you're below the threshold, but as soon as you start repaying the loan, the interest rate starts going up, rising to as much as 6% for those earning over £53,000. Crucially though, and this is a big difference between the two, Plan 2 is written off after 30 years, whereas Plan 5 isn't written off until after 40 years. So potentially on Plan 2, you have a higher interest rate, but on Plan 5, you will be paying it for longer. Now, the older Plan 2s were the ones that caused lots of controversy earlier this year. That was because lots of young professionals, so potentially people on higher incomes, realised they were paying off lots of their student loans, all while the interest rate meant the total amount owed was going up. Because if you've got RPI inflation, which for a while was about 12%, wasn't it? Then you add 3% on it, just your amount, your principal, as it's called, is just going up by extraordinary degrees. There was one positive aspect of that older system, though. It meant that richer graduates paid much more than poorer ones. So you can see here that between 2012 and 2023, so that's people on the Plan 2, the cost of university education over one's lifetime was much higher for high earners, so in dark blue there, and that was due to the higher interest rate on those on high income. So an upper earner could expect to pay £80,000 over the course of their lifetime to pay down their loan. For those on lower incomes, they'd only pay £20,000. So very progressive, even if it was very expensive. The introduction of Plan 5 in 2023 radically changed things. So the cost of a higher earner's degree suddenly dropped by around £20,000 to just under £60,000, whereas the cost to low earners, the brown line, rose by the same to just over £40,000. Median earners in light blue saw the cost of their degree go up by around £15,000, making it actually slightly more expensive than a high earners. That's because the high earners will pay it off quicker. And the key difference here is, as I said, because the interest rate is no longer progressive, meaning high earners can pay less in total if they pay it off quickly. And because the write-off date has been extended, many more low earners than before will pay off their loans in full. So when it was a 30-year cut-off, a hell of a lot of people don't pay them off in full. I'm not even sure I'm going to pay mine off in full, actually. But there are lots of people now, if you're paying for 40 years, you probably will. Now, when the current university fees were introduced by the coalition government in 2012, one argument for them was that graduates earned a significant premium as a result of their degree, and so they should bear the cost of that education. You've got something which means you get a higher sort of income later in life, so you shouldn't force non-graduates to pay for it. That premium, so the graduate premium, does still exist, but it isn't nearly what it once was. So this is a graphic which sort of on first look looks very confusing from the FT, but it's actually quite simple once you get a hang of it. So in 1997, graduate salaries in the UK had an 80% premium over non-graduates. Back then, though, only around 20% of the workforce had degrees, but as participation in higher education increased, that premium dropped to about 45% in 2022. So lots of people thought that's just because there's more graduates, that means there's a lower premium. However, and that's why the other countries on this graph are sort of relevant, is because The same pattern hasn't held in countries like France, Spain, and the US. There, the graduate premium has increased, even though, just like in the UK, lots more people are going to university. So this is the John Byrne-Murdoch graph, and he's sort of saying something else is going on, which is that there aren't the jobs there for graduates to do. The government is also paying a smaller portion of the cost of higher education than ever before. In 2015, the government's combined contribution was almost half of the total cost of a graduate's education, but now just 8% of that cost will be met by the government. So basically, all of it is paid for by the students before a lot of it was paid for by the taxpayer. Student loans operate on terms as well that might make a payday lender blush. So according to the Telegraph, from 2017 onwards, interest began being added to loans faster than people were able to pay them off. And over the last 2 years, almost £30 billion of interest has been added to the country's collective student debt, with those managing to pay off only around £10 billion in the same period. So the total amount owed is constantly going up, even though people are paying it off. Of course, the interest compounds over time. So it's no wonder students are starting to conclude it's just not worth it. In June, a survey conducted by the National Centre for Social Research found that a third of people thought a university degree wasn't worth the time and money. That's a proportion that's just about doubled in the last 7 years alone. It's all pretty depressing so far. For hope, we're going to look to a former education minister under Theresa May. Who would believe it? He was also a cabinet minister under Boris Johnson, a man called Lord Agnew. So referring to the student debt disaster, he's proposed banning the triple lock to abolish interest on student loans. At present, pensions rise annually at the rate of inflation, average wage growth, or 2.5%, whichever is higher. Now, Agnew wants to get rid of the last option. Makes sense to me. Why should pensions go up by more than wages or prices in a given year? He uses OBR projections to say this could save £15 billion a year over the cost of sort of a simple link. So if you move to just a link to wage rises, you save £15 billion compared to the triple lock. Agnew writes this: ending real interest would cancel nobody's loan, of course. It would freeze the balance in place so that a graduate repays what they borrowed and no more. And no pensioner would be a penny worse off than today. Their pension would still rise every year at a slightly more sensible rate. I am on the winning side of the present settlement. It is my generation that pushed up house prices until our own children cannot buy. We then ran up the national debt and posted the bill to our grandchildren. And although I never went to university, I saw friends enjoy free education and free living grants provided by the local authority. He goes on, this isn't about pitting young against old, but about asking both to pay a fair price for a system neither of them designed. A double lock and a debt freeze would cost pensioners nothing and save a generation of graduates interest they can't escape. Ash, all seems very sensible to me. Are we in favour of Theresa May's education minister's plan?
Well, look, it's a really interesting idea because the UK is pretty unique when it comes to the triple lock. So most countries for the state pension will have some kind of indexing, so tying state pension increases to inflation, sometimes to wages. But from what I can see, nobody has this sort of discretionary 2.5% no matter what increase, right? No matter what else is going on with the economy, no matter what else is going on with wages, no matter what else is going on with inflation, your pension will go up by this much. So the UK is pretty unique in that regard. I don't mind bringing in some sort of age-based redistribution because I do think that while it's a mistake to look at the economic settlement purely in terms of age, because we do have really high rates of pensioner poverty in this country, you do have to admit that free education, house prices, all of these things benefited certain age groups more than others. It doesn't mean that you don't have, pretty extreme forms of class inequality within those generations, but it exists. So I'm always in favour of thinking about, what is the sweetener going the other way? So if you go, okay, you're going to get rid of a triple lock and you're going to go to a double lock, but what you're going to then do is maybe have a social care system, which is a lot better and less expensive. You have eradicated the role of private equity in the social care system. You bring costs down that way. Maybe you have more of a prevention-based model of elderly social care, which is often what you find in East Asia. So you try and bring down costs by saying, okay, older people are going to have healthier lifestyles overall and we intervene early. And so that's going to bring down the cost. You go, well, that's the sweetener. You're going to have to spend less of your savings. You're not going to have to sell your house in order to be looked after when you're an older person. So I don't mind a bit of age-based redistribution because I think it is just a fact that if you are part of a post-financial crisis generation, and in particular, if you're post-2012, so I'm pre-2012 because I started uni in 2010, but if you're post-2012 and you entered higher education, you got royally fucked. And the higher education system, and this is sort of separate from the points about being laden with debt and the state of the job market. Higher education system is in a state of collapse at the moment when it comes to the closure of departments, when it comes to overcrowding of classes, when it comes to this quite like transactional relationship between the students and their lecturers. You're being bled dry throughout your life for this experience of having gone to university, which is neither giving you the sort of passport to an echelon of higher paying jobs once you get into the labour market, but it's also not an inherently beneficial intellectual experience anymore. It's shit on both sides.
I mean, I think we have a weird sort of, we kind of punish you for being young in this country.
100%.
And it's strange because, you know, so my student debt will run out after 30 years, I think, since I finished my degree, which is like 2012. So when will that be? When will that be, Ash? Help me out. 2042?
Yeah.
Something like that. So sort of at that point in time, I'll get this big boost to my income. But like, I kind of need that now. You know, if I want to start a family, I want that money now. I don't want that. You know, I don't need to be a rich 50-year-old. I want to be a kind of guy in my mid-30s who's able to pay my rent without worrying about it, or maybe even buy a house.
But and also this is the thing, is that you need young workers in the labour market to pay for pensions. And what we have is a system which is extracting from young people at every single turn. So not just thinking about the interest on student loans, but you're thinking about rent, the cost of housing, cost of transport. When you think about the sort of evisceration of entry-level positions, when you think about, say you take the NHS, the reduction in paid training places. So it means that you've got your degree, you've got your qualifications, but you cannot progress through the NHS if you're a doctor. You just sort of think, do you want people to have kids or not? Because I think that people have families for reasons which are both rational and irrational, right? So there are things which are sort of not to do with, oh, I've reasoned this out. It's like fulfillment, love, etc., etc. It's not just the raw economics. But you can't pretend that the raw economics aren't important to when you have children, if you have children, how many children you have. And it's no good having a generation of people who are squatting on, you know, £1 million properties, you know, and having their pensions protected in a way that wages never have been. If you end up just absolutely, and not to sound quite grim about it, killing off the flow of new blood into your welfare system, right? Because that's what workers are. Because
also with inheritance, so obviously the big problem with inheritance is how unfair it is, because some people get this windfall from their parents because they owned a home in a major city and some people don't. So sort of, especially with house deposits and stuff, that's huge. But then also even for people who will inherit at some point, again, there's all these people who are going to get this windfall in their 50s and they're like, oh, I would have really used that in my 30s when I was, you know, again, thinking of starting a family or something like that. And I was like, what am I going to just go on more holidays, I suppose?
That's why when I go to my mum's house and I go, are you doing all right? Are you well? And she goes, yeah, fizz a fiddle. I'm like, fuck you. No. I love you, mum.
But we should have a very high progressive property tax. Because obviously people will be watching this and say, why are you pitting the state pension against university tuition fees? Which I think is quite right. You know, it's the people with really good pensions aren't the people on the state pension. The people on really good pensions are the people with these defined benefit schemes, you know, especially in the public sector, but also if you work for like a big company, which are very generous compared to the pensions that sort of people of our generation will get. So sort of pitting the state pension against student loans is not ideal. Like ideally what you do is tax incomes, you know, including pensioner income when it's sort of from private pensions, and massively tax property. I would want to just massively tax property and pay for all of this. But if a choice is between the triple lock and this proposal when it comes to student loans, 100% I would do that.